Welcome back. Now, South Africa's agricultural exports are a significant contributor to the country's economy. But has the country missed critical openings in Brics to enhance trade relations? Today, we look into how SA can use the Brics structure to boost agricultural exports to new frontiers while maintaining access to existing markets. And joining us for that discussion is Wandile Sihlobo, Chief Economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa. Thank you so much for your time, Wandile. Now, of course, for South Africa to be able to meet the demand that it wants to create, it needs to make sure that it does have significant supply. And of course, that now leads us to the question of production. How much room is there for agricultural production, but also making sure that we can actually transport the products out of South Africa?
I think we have a lot in terms of the supply, because even if you were to look at what we are doing at this moment, South Africa exports about half of what we produce a year. In value terms, relative to major players, it's not big, but relative to the region we are in, it is quite big. It's about $13.2 billion as of last year, and really the only African country in the top 40 global agricultural exporters. But when you now unpack that and say, what is it that we send to the world, you realize that there's a lot of fruits, there's wine, there's grains, wool, as well as a lot of fruit that is in that basket. But what's more important is that we have more trees now that are planted out there that are yet to bear fruit. And I think it's important that we look for new markets at which that product will actually go to. And secondly, the fact that the geopolitics have introduced a number of risks and the environmental policies in the EU and the other markets. And I think diversification becomes important. And lastly, there's a lot of land that we had to till, over 2.5 million hectares of land, which I think if we plant it successfully, we'll be able to have the volumes to put to markets. But the most difficult part is the one that you are asking of the logistics.
Yeah.
Because we can produce whatever we want and have export markets, but without proper improvement of roads, rail, and the ports, which remains a challenge, then much of this may not be as a success we want.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting also that you talk about the geopolitics, because, I mean, that remains a risk. But it's quite interesting to see that, I mean, by expanding, exports within the Brics countries, that kind of makes us a little bit more defensive. Talking about risks, though, because climate change does remain a significant emerging risk. What kind of muscle are we building in terms of innovation to make us resilient against climate change?
We are leaning more as South Africa on science in this. I mean, you look at our agricultural sector today, you compare to where we were in 1994. It's more than doubled in value and volume terms. And much of that has really been the productivity gains. By science, I'm meaning better seed cultivars that can be able to adapt on these harsh production conditions, but also better genetics for animals so that we can be able to have livestock and sheep and everything else in these harsh weather conditions. But Zanati, the issue of Brics also, it's not only just the ideology per se,
yeah,
but it's more of an economic reality. Because if you look at a Brics grouping now with all of the added new members, it literally accounts for about half of global agricultural trade. And at the moment, intra-Brics trade is fairly low. That grouping on its own, it accounts only for about 8% of our agricultural exports, while much of our trade happens to other regions. So there is then that idea of saying, how do we get paid for being there in the Brics through our exports? And I think much of it is really driven by that, the economics, rather than even an ideological side.
Has trade actually just not been a priority within Brics?
I mean, it has been in as far as from last year, December. You will recall this in the 15th summit in Johannesburg, that we began talking about trade more. But before that, as best as I can recall, it was not on top of the agenda. And it is now where we are finally crystallizing some of the practical steps that could be taken in place. For example, in my capacity chairing the Agribusiness Working Group at the Brics Business Council last year and this year, one of the key things that we put forward in Moscow and continued in Kazan was the issue of saying, can we come up with the Brics Agricultural Preferential Trade Agreement that will be for long term, but for the near term, we do think that there is a need for some intergovernment working groups that must happen that will deal with the two things that are hindering trade in agriculture in BRICS. One, it's a higher import tariffs. Two, it's a phytosanitary barriers, which is the way plants and animals are handled in various countries, which then ends up blocking trade. So we hope then that on those bilateral agreements, that's something that could lead to a better trade, not only just us, but also other members of BRICS that are also keen on this. And really to emphasize on this point is that there is support from China, there is support from Brazil, and some in Russia on really exploring some of these things that South Africa proposed this year.
You're talking about agreements that are being worked on, and of course the fact that there is support from some of the BRICS countries. But at this point, is it still just high-level interactions, engagements and talks where nothing has really been crystallized in terms of the kind of business-to-business interaction between the countries?
So far, it is at a high level. But what's interesting or encouraging also is that, I'm making this point as part of the agribusiness team in the BRICS Business Council, which is the private sector. And for us then to do anything, we do need our political principles to get things over the line. And then after that, again, commerce to commence. But I think what's more important is that this is part now of the dialogue at all levels. But as to whether then we are able to keep up and deliver to this promise, that's something that I think from a South Africa side, the DTIC as well as DERCO will have to drive this. Agriculture and the others are supporting that work. And I think from next year onwards, we hope that there will be some tangible things that many businesses that follow these will begin to see that things are moving.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. We do have to wrap up the conversation there, Wandile. Thank you for your insights. That was Wandile Sihlobo, Chief Economist at Agbiz.